book. I read your book and was deeply moved. Especially, I think it took emotional courage for you to write the book. And the ending part of it, when you came back to your family, was incredible. I don't know how you survived that. But what I wanted to ask is, what can we do in the future? And part of the future being understanding ourselves better. The word rendition keeps bouncing around. And it seems to say to me, though I know very little about it, that we are setting ourselves up to keep repeating the terrible errors that have been made in the places where you have been. Could you talk about that a little bit and give us some ideas about what we need to do to hope?
I don't know. Short answer. 2 years ago, I was in a tiny little cell contemplating whether in this 8-foot by 6-foot cell, in which I couldn't walk more than 3 steps in either direction, in which there was no natural light, I didn't know whether I was going to spend the rest of my life there, or decades, or whether the children that I'd left, who were only children at the time, would be adults by the time I was released, if I was released, or as many interrogators had threatened, that I was going to be executed in one of the gas chambers that they had said they'd seen and had been built in Guantanamo. I didn't think, first of all, that I was going to be released, and when I was released, I didn't think that I would be asked about questions that allude to almost the saving of the world. So with that, I answer that I don't know. All I can say is that, for example, in the thing that you've mentioned, the renditions process, it's a very frightening one. And it's frightening for all sorts of reasons, not least because it abrogates any sense of moral high ground or the rule of law, and that the people who practice this can no longer say that we're any different from the despots and the tyrants that we claim to oppose. In fact, recently I remember that Eritrea chided the United States government of America on human rights issues. Eritrea, of all places. The United States government had said to Eritreans that their human rights record was abysmal. And they replied by saying, "Excuse me, did you not see Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo in your own backyard?" So it's all of these things, I think, that are very important to recognize. And for example, the term rendition, I looked it up recently. It's not new. The last time it was used of any significance was during the period of slavery, when escaped slaves were rendered from one state to another. The term extraordinary rendition is really a euphemism for something much more sinister. Kidnap, abduction, false imprisonment, torture, and in some cases even death. What to do about all of this is for people who once recognize this, is to spread it and to let other people know the real side, or at least both sides of the story. And once that's done, then to oppose it in whatever way is possible. Because if it's not opposed, if it goes unchallenged, then what we have, in my humble estimation, is just another form of terrorism. Terrorism, by definition, isn't just practiced by individuals or amorphous organizations. Terrorism, by definition, can be practiced by states or supported by states, or the tactics of terror can be used by states. And I can tell you that the night I was kidnapped with a gun put to my head, dragged away, hooded, shackled, was an act and a tactic of terror. It's a tactic that's known that terrorists will use.
Hello. I read your book too, and I commend it to all who are here.
What struck me in reading it is that while you're not a terrorist, in many ways you fit the profile of those people who are using racial profiling to round up people. You were in Bosnia, you tried to go to Chechnya, you were in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And has it occurred to you, given this, that the war on terror is really, at least in part, a euphemism, that it's really a much broader war, at least on the part of some people, against people with ideas and sensibilities like yours, and not just about terrorism per se?
I think that's correct. I think that's been stated quite clearly by particularly people in this country. It's a war of ideologies. It's a war against a mindset. It's a war against something that's not clearly defined. But just to sort of give an idea, we have, and I think this partly goes back to the clash of civilizations theory, and that is that wherever you find that there has been a call for people in the Muslim world to be governed by their own laws or by laws that they feel are Islamic, for example, in Algeria, you had the Islamic Salvation Front poised to win the elections. The government of the day cancelled the elections, suspended the constitution, and what ensued after that was a terrible war that continues to this day, claiming hundreds of thousands of lives. The odd thing in all of this is that not one Western government actually supported the democratic process in this. Neither have they supported it in Turkey when the military ousted the government of the day that was Islamic, voted in by the people. It also does not support places in Palestine, for example, that have been brought into power by democracy. And the same is true of even Iran, which is more democratic than allies like Saudi Arabia or Kuwait or Bahrain or some of these other places. So then the argument, of course, we must recognize it's not about democracy. It never has been. It is about, in fact, having influence and power in places where there can be no check, where there can be no revolt, as it were, or refusal to accept everything that's been given to them by Western powers. Also, if you recognize and try to remember, I think it's really important, is that although part of this profile is correct, I didn't take weapons into Afghanistan. I didn't supply them with Stinger missiles. I didn't teach them tactics of bringing down Mi-24 Devil's Chariot helicopters. I didn't teach them how to slit the throats of Russian soldiers. That was all done by the US, CIA, British intelligence, and Western powers. So it's important to recognize is that at that time, when the Afghan Mujahideen were lionized in even films like Rambo 3, yes, Sylvester Stallone even came to save Afghanistan, it seems that has all completely changed. And it's changed only because that same ideology which was nurtured at that time has now turned against the United States of America or the West. But not that the ideology in itself per se was a bad one, because it was utilized. So I think it's a very deep question, but you are partly correct in what you say.
Good evening, Moazzam. My name is Nancy Tulane, and I'm with the Bill of Rights Defense Committee. And I have more comment than a question. I wanted to not let the evening go by without mentioning your wonderful father, who spoke tirelessly and pleaded for your release for the longest time. And Americans heard him many, many times in the news pleading for your release, and that's how we first knew about you. And he has been brought to life along with you through your letters, etc., in a play put together by Victoria Britton and Jillian Slover, Victoria being your assistant on your book. And thanks to Rob Miracle of the Rosenberg Fund for Children, who just asked the previous question. Our organization was brought together with the Center for Constitutional Rights to have people across the country put on readings of this play, which is one way that we've been able to bring a little bit more exposure to the horror that is Guantanamo and what our government is doing in our names. But I want to thank you for making yourself available so that we can have your words spread even farther, be it whatever means there is available. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for opening the heart.
Good evening. I'd like to ask you what you think the tipping point was that got you out of Guantanamo. You spoke about, and Nancy Tulane just spoke about your dad and his impassioned pleas, but they kept you, and they kept you, and they kept you, and at some point you were released. Either the British were motivated more seriously to try to seek your release, or the Americans at least were at some point acquiesced to it. What happened, do you think?
That's another one of those I don't know questions. But the answer perhaps, or definitely, lies in the hands of the British and the American governments, I suppose, because they, between themselves, made an agreement. But I think the catalyst, the turning point, as it were, the tipping point, as you said, was my father's campaign. I think that what he'd managed to do, almost single-handedly, but of course not really, because people from all around the world, the United States included, had helped him to highlight and to bring forth his argument and his demands, even to the doors of the White House itself. He asked, and I think his call was pretty simple, and that was, he wasn't begging for mercy, and he wasn't pleading for clemency. What he was demanding, though, was justice. And he did actually say quite categorically that if my son has committed a crime, let him be presented to the court where he is charged and given due process. It was that call and that method that he used, I think, which was appealing and just, because that's all that he asked for. And I think that reached the ears of the people in power in this country, which then reached the ears of the people in power in your country, and eventually brought about this agreement between the two governments, for not just my release, but for the release of several other people who were also held with me. So I think that's what it was, my father's campaign, really.
Assalamualaikum. My name is Sana, and on behalf of Ummah, I'd just like to say how glad I am that this dialogue was possible. This is very enlightening and very interesting to listen to. I just had a question in terms of what do you think would be the long-term impacts of the atrocities that have happened at Guantanamo on history? How do you think 20 years down the line this will be remembered? Or the perceptions that people will have about this, or how this will basically affect the way people think or history in terms of what happened and what was carried out here?
I was once visited in Guantanamo in my cell by a psychiatrist, and one of the things she said to me was that she wasn't very proud at this point in time of being associated with the US military. She was a military psychiatrist. And she said to me that one day she believes that sections of Guantanamo Bay, the telltale cages, converted shipping containers, would be taken to the Smithsonian Museum and presented there in an exhibition as a black page in the history of the United States of America, in the same way that parts of the internment camps of the Japanese internment era were also, or have also been displayed there. I think, I've never been to the Smithsonian, so I don't know how that appears or how people think of it when they go and visit it, but I don't think people look at it in a very proud way. I don't think the people regard that as one of the things they want America to be remembered for, in the same way as that they don't want America to be remembered for slavery or any of the other bad things that took place in its history. But as one of the guards told me there also, he also said that he believes that Guantanamo is going to be one of the black pages in the history of the United States of America. In light of the war on terror, the so-called war on terror, the war in Iraq, Afghanistan and elsewhere, it will be, I think, recognized or remembered as a focal point towards which everybody thought, United States allies included, that the US government, Bush in particular, had lost all sense of reality and built this place, and ironically lost his, I think support would not be the right word, but lost his mind in the as a result of trying to prosecute this war and telling the people of the United States of America that everything's safe as a result of this action.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I think I may be asking you another I don't know question, because perhaps I'll ask for your commentary as opposed to your action plan. And so I'm thinking about what you're talking about, how your father appealed to people globally and to join in your campaign to release you. My question becomes in the sense that I think of the United States, it's oftentimes stereotyped as a very religious country, and I would say it's probably true. Although religion is separate from the state, Judeo-Christian values very much go through the policy. And the United States is opposing other countries' choice to use the fabric of their culture as a platform for policy. So with that said, how do you feel about the fact that a country that is basically very Christian, although they may not want to say that, I would say that's probably true, is combating other countries' choice to use their own values? I guess that'd be my commentary question. And then on the second, the action plan would be, because Christianity in theory would be against torture, that would be, I don't know if you know a lot about Christianity, but Jesus died in rough, obviously basics, but no, I don't assume, I don't know a lot about Islam. So how could you tack that on to Christianity if that's a platform for the country to say, no, this is bad? Because I think that would move people. Because people get in uproar about gay marriage, they get in uproar about abortion, but people being chained somehow is not something you see at the top of the CNN profile. I don't understand why. I hope I didn't offend you. I apologize.
Okay, yeah. That was a really good question. The only problem is I've forgotten it. The commentary, could you just sort of refresh my memory of the first part of it? Okay, sorry, got it, remember. It's okay. I think that absolutely there's a difference between, for example, Ahmadinejad of Iran and President Bush, as indeed it is of the Palestinian Authority or any other sort of Islamic organizations or governments. And that is that whilst they do sometimes use draconian or strong Islamic laws to apply on their people, God doesn't talk to them. They talk about God. President Bush, I think, is one of the few people in this day and age who actually has direct revelation from the Almighty. And I think that hasn't happened since the time of Jesus. So he's in a pretty unique position, I suppose. He could be starting his own faith soon, his own religion. And so, yes, I think that we also have a problem here with Tony Blair also. Tony Blair also believes that he speaks to God. And one of the questions that was asked by a presenter over here is that he said that when you meet President Bush, do you guys speak to God together?